Okay, so we're doing things, like Peter said at the start, a little bit out of chronological order, and I'm going to talk a bit more about now, I hope. Because I am, in some ways, lucky enough to have grown up and become an adult in a world that benefited from the struggles that the comrades before me have waged, the battles they have won, the things they have gone through. So I was born after the miners' strike. So I benefited from a lot of those things in lots of ways. But there's two things I think that are important about that. One is that, like Peter just talked about, we cannot forget those struggles and how we won those things. I think there is a tendency within the whole world, but there is definitely a tendency within the labour movement to forget where these things came from. And actually a wish to erase where they came from, because where they came from was struggle, from working class people's struggles, not just from some benevolence from above signing off these laws because we happen to have a Labour government. It's definitely true that the Labour government in 1997 would not have done the things that it had done unless those struggles had been waged in the Labour Party. It's important for us to remember that. But it's also another thing I want to qualify that kind of we've come a long way and I've benefited from it with is that there is still problems. There's problems, like Peter said, in that we have formal equality in lots of ways, legal equality in lots of ways, but not liberation. And I think too often there is a tendency to equate equality and liberation, as if achieving laws means that we are liberated, and we are not. But also because I think the labour movement, in lots of ways, fails to continue to fight on certain things. And I think I'm going to criticise various sections of the labour movement in the way it behaves and acts today, for what I think is could allow rights to be rolled back, but certainly is not putting forward a case to continue. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience. So I was a school teacher for 5 years. I was a secondary school teacher. I was a member of the National Union of Teachers. National Union of Teachers, on paper, has a wonderful LGBT campaign. We have an individual autonomous run campaign. The national office in London has 3 full-time organisers to work solely on LGBT stuff. I know the senior organiser. Lots of resources pumped into it. But that means nothing if on the ground our union is not organised, organised industrially and strong industrially and has power in the workplace. It also means nothing if those policies aren't enacted on the ground and aren't integral to the whole of the labour movement rather than just a separate part of it, and I'll come back to that bit in a minute. So as a teacher, I worked in a fairly rough secondary school in Rotherham, just near Sheffield. Very poor working class kids, wonderful kids who can achieve so much in the world. But it was a rough place to work, and there was quite a lot of homophobia. I remember one particular incident where there was 4 or 5 out teachers in the school, and I was the only one of them who would ever, if children were using gay as it's silly or stupid, etc., challenge it. So it's not okay. And I challenged that. I remember one incident where I challenged that, and the student said to me, "Oh well, I do think gay people are stupid, and silly is not okay, and I don't like that." So I dealt with that situation, rang the parent, and I had to deal with a situation where the parent came in and said, "Well, I agree with my daughter. Gay people are stupid and are wrong. It shouldn't be allowed, and I want to challenge your handling this situation." Not only could I get very little backup from my colleagues, people around me, but very little backup from my union on the ground. And that's because the union was weak in the school. And we tried a lot to build the union in the school, but the union was weak in the school. Union members didn't feel like they had the power and the ability to say, "No, we run this workplace. As our bosses, you as our bosses don't necessarily know better than us how to run this workplace." These two things were linked. The more power, the more organised the union has in the workplace, the more equal workplaces are. And we should kind of think about that with the experience of the labour movement. I also want to talk about the labour movement's kind of operation now in terms of LGBT politics and campaigns. So I mentioned kind of my union, and it has all these things on paper, brilliant organisation on paper, ticks lots of boxes. But on the ground, not in all places, it does a lot of very good work, I know, but on the ground not necessarily perfect. I think there is a tendency within our labour movement to have a business model of equality, like a business model of organising, business model of unions. You join the union to have an insurance policy. Your union can provide some insurance cover if you discriminate against at work, and so on and so on. I think in a lot of workplaces, formally what you could get from your employer in terms of training or kind of policies would actually not be that different to what the union would be. There's a reason for that, because the unions have fought for it, but we shouldn't see our role as LGBT activists in the labour movement as just providing the sort of training that your employer has to now provide by law anyway, or the sort of equality that your employer has to provide by law. And I think that business model of equality in the labour movement needs to be challenged, and we need to think about what sort of labour movement, what sort of LGBT labour movement we want. There's kind of two experiences that have happened recently that have brought home to me kind of political degradation in the labour movement, the LGBT sections of the labour movement. One was on Pride 2 weeks ago, London Pride 2 weeks ago, where I wasn't actually there. My girlfriend was in the Labour Party, the LGBT Labour section, and Jeremy Corbyn came to Pride, and wanted to march with the LGBT Labour section, and was confronted and shouted at by various right-wing activists who were in LGBT Labour, who say, "You're not welcome here, you're not part of our movement," etc., etc. So that happened. And the other thing, which I don't want to talk about too much because I know that Emma might want to talk about it a little bit, is what's happened recently in Wallasey. So Wallasey CLP is Angela Eagle's constituency. Angela Eagle is a gay woman. And on national TV last week, Tessa Jowell accused Wallasey CLP of being homophobic to Angela at a meeting where it expressed that they wanted Angela to vote for confidence in Jeremy Corbyn, not to take part in the coup that is currently being staged. And the response of that CLP has been exactly right, to say that it didn't happen. I am aware, and I think we should raise it, that there has been claims of homophobia online, which I think we should deal with. But the CLP was exactly right to challenge that it didn't happen, and to say, more importantly, that false claims of homophobia only serve to undermine real experiences of homophobia. And that brings me on to kind of my political point about this, which is a sort of right-wing identity politics in the LGBT labour movement. I'll explain what I mean by this, because actually, usually it's not seen as right-wing, it's seen as very apolitical, but actually apolitical is right-wing in lots of cases. And that's this idea that because we've got formal equality, that we have our LGBT sections in our labour movement, in our Labour Party, and I agree with what Peter said, that the labour movement is not just our trade unions, it's a political wing of the movement as well as the Labour Party. That because we have formal equality, that all we need to do now is we are here, we have our label, and it's apolitical. It's a kind of identity. And I think that comes down to what I was saying earlier about a business model of equality. You have these sections, and they have decent policies on paper, but it's seen as a separate part of the labour movement, not integrated with the struggles of the rest of the labour movement, not integrated with the industrial struggles of the labour movement, which until recently actually there hasn't been many, and that's important, because low levels of industrial struggles means high level of inequality in society, full stop. And that's a form of right-wing identity politics. And it can get used in the way that it has been used against Jeremy Corbyn, it can get used in the way it's been used in the situation in Wallasey. And that's something that needs to be challenged. And it comes down to that equality liberation thing I was talking about. The final thing I want to talk about is to put a vision then, a vision of what sort of LGBT labour movement do we need. And I think that question is integrally linked to what sort of labour movement do we need, because they're not separate things. And our rights within the labour movement and within the world are not won by having separate labour movement and LGBT rights movement, as Peter has outlined. that vision of what sort of LGBT labour movement we need is a labour movement that doesn't separate off its LGBT sections from its wider struggle. They're integral. They're about a better and more equal world. It's about being a presence in the labour movement. So I was on Pride last year, London Pride last year. I was unfortunate enough not to be able to be there this year. London Pride last year was a brilliant expression of a labour movement section on Pride. And it really did counterweight the police float and the Barclays Bank float, whatever other crap is on it. It really did counteract that last year. But this year it had been scaled back quite a lot. On the official list of which unions were marching, the only ones officially mentioned were the RMT and Unison. I know there was others.
There's a lot more.
I know there was a lot more there, but the official list wasn't. At the back of the march as well. And that's been my, again, I was unfortunate not to be there this year, but that's been my experience on Pride marches before. So a labour movement leading the struggle for LGBT rights should be leading Pride. It created Pride, it should be there. A labour movement that is democratic from the workplace to the top and run from the workplace to the top with accountable officials who are not able to get comfortable in their office, the union headquarters, but are accountable to the movement. But also a labour movement that brings LGBT rights into the workplace, not seeing it as some tick box activity that we kind of do by law and we do because we're good people. That we fight for it on the ground, and we are the expression of that on the ground, as well as the expression of the fight for a better world for all oppressed people. A labour movement, an LGBT labour movement, a labour movement that has free debate, that debates political ideas rather than kind of putting aside the ones we don't think are particularly nice. We might think they're wrong, but we should debate them. A labour movement that is an LGBT labour movement that is diverse. So Peter and myself have stepped in to talk because Marie Eagle is unable to attend this weekend. And I joked to Peter earlier that we thought we should have me on the panel as well so that it wasn't two white men. It's important. It's a joke, but it's important. A labour movement that's diverse and an LGBT labour movement that's diverse. So that's my vision of a different LGBT labour movement now. And it links to how we got here from the past. That's what was fought for, and we shouldn't allow it to be scaled back into right-wing politicians saying, well, this is what I am, and scaling back how we got to where we were, the struggles that got us where we are now.
Okay, thank you, Gemma.